Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today we have with us Nikos Christofis, Assistant Professor at the Department of Language and Intercultural Studies of the University of Thessaly. He collaborates with the Hellenic Open University and the Netherlands Institute of Athens and has an extensive publication record in Greek, English, Turkish, Chinese, and Spanish, including more than 70 articles, book chapters, 16 edited volumes, and one monography. He will speak today about the elections in the occupied territories of Cyprus and the initial reflections.
Okay. Shall I start?
Elena, would you like to say some words about the webinar?
I would just like to add that this is a part of a series of webinars that we are doing, both in Greek and English speaking, for our students and the wider public in Cyprus and abroad. Thank you very much, Professor, for participating today, and thank you to all our guests that are here. I think we can start. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, both Zakia and Eleni and the Naples University for the invitation. As Zakia mentioned, my talk will be on the Turkish Cypriot elections conducted on 19th of October. Just something to clarify before I begin. Whenever I mention Northern Cyprus, I specifically mention it as a geographical region, not that I recognize the TRNC, the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, just to clarification and for making myself easy, not to mention every time, right? You know how it is in Cyprus, like pseudo elections, the pseudo state. So in order to avoid all these adjectives, just to be clear. So to begin, the Turkish Cypriot leadership elections of October 2025 marked one of the most politically significant moments in the recent history of the occupied northern part of Cyprus. Although formally framed as presidential elections, this contest quickly proved to be far more than a routine electoral cycle, would say. It became, in essence, a referendum on the political direction of the Turkish Cypriot community, its relationship with Turkey, and the future of any potential settlement of the Cyprus question or the Cyprus problem, as it is called. Of course, the past 3 or 4 elections even had this essence, like a referendum, right? What would be the future of the Turkish Cypriot community? Now, in these elections, 2 major candidates dominated the political landscape. On the one side, we had Ersin Tatar, the leader, closely aligned with Ankara and the staunch advocate of the two-state solution. His political discourse centered on the idea of sovereign equality and the consolidation of the Turkish Cypriot entity as a separate state. And on the other side was Tufan Erhuman, the leader of the Republican Turkish Party. Erhuman campaigned on a contrasting platform that emphasized a return to negotiations, potentially even on the basis of a looser federation, while coupling this with commitments to institutional reform, economic stability, and better governance. The political dualism between these 2 political parties go back decades, though, and still, in my opinion, defines to a large extent the political map of the North today. Here, allow me to go back a few decades and mentioned that the origins of the organized Turkish Cypriot political life date back to the 1940s, well before the division of the island. Under British colonial rule, political mobilization emerged around three main axes. First, communal elites, teachers, religious leaders, and lawyers, played a formative role in shaping early political discourse. Second, modernizing influences from the Turkish Republic, right? We have especially the principles of Kemalism from Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, provided a framework for political identity. And third, the rise of the Greek Cypriot movement for enosis, right, political union of Cyprus with Greece, that prompted the Turkish Cypriot community to articulate its own political positions in defensive and communal terms. Now, one of the earliest formal organizations was Katak, established 1943, whose main purpose was to protect Turkish Cypriot communal interests. In parallel, a left-wing current began to gain ground, particularly through the influence of AKEL, right, the Communist Party of the Republic of Cyprus. It is important to remember that during the 1940s and 50s, a significant portion of Turkish Cypriot workers and intellectuals supported the idea of a shared Cypriot political identity based on class rather than ethnicity. This bicommunal left became an important, albeit ultimately vulnerable, counterweight to rising nationalism. By the 1950s, Turkish Cypriot nationalism had begun to crystallize around more coherent structures under the leadership of Dr. Fazıl Küçük and later Rauf Denktaş. Nationalist organizations articulated the demand for partition, in Turkish called Taksim, as the appropriate response to the Greek Cypriot goal of enosis. The newspaper Halkın Sesi, founded by Küçük, became a key ideological platform during the period. Turkish Cypriot leftists, including figures like Dervish Ali Kabazoglu, who was murdered by Turkish nationalists, advocated instead for a united, independent Cyprus, but they were often violently targeted by nationalist paramilitaries. Now, following the collapse of the 1960 constitutional partnership, in 1963, Turkish Cypriots lived in enclaves, were forced to live in enclaves, administered largely autonomously. And it was during this period that the foundational modern political parties took shape. For example, in 1970, we have the Republican Turkish Party was established as a social democratic pro-reunification party committed to federalism. In 1975, the National Unity Party, the UBP, while the first I will mention it, I will refer to it as CTP, emerged under Denktaş's influence as a nationalist and pro-Turkey force. From this point onward, CTP and UBP represented the main ideological poles of Turkish Cypriot politics. One advocating coexistence, compromise, and a federal solution, and the other defending the idea of sovereignty, security, and alignment with Turkey. It was that time that the first indication that traditional ideological divisions were re-emerging, but it was only after the momentous and tragic events of the 1974 invasion and the subsequent partition of Cyprus that Turkish Cypriot political parties began to proliferate, offering voters for the first time a genuine range of political choices. A constituent assembly elected to draft a new constitution for Northern Cyprus included critics of the existing administration, whose influence in shaping the newly proclaimed Turkish Federated State of Cyprus was considerable. In August 1975, a second opposition party, the Populist Party, advocating a moderate social democratic agenda, was formed. It was soon followed by the emergence of a new governing party on the right, as we mentioned, the UBP, the National Unity Party, led by Denktash, that we mentioned already. Although broadly right of center in its social and economic outlook, the UBP chiefly promoted a nationalist agenda and the maintenance of close ties with Turkey. Uh, 1 year later, the following year, internal divisions led to a split within the Populist Party, resulting in the creation of another left of center party, the Communal Liberation Party, the TKP, not to be confused with the Turkish Communist Party, the Türk Komünist Partisi, which is also the acronym, has also the acronym TKP. In an increasingly crowded political landscape, the TKP positioned itself somewhat to the right of the CTP on social and economic matters. In the 1976 elections, the first held after the division, after the invasion and the division of the island, Denktash and his party achieved easy victories. By 1981, however, a revitalized left-wing opposition succeeded in significantly weakening both Denktash and the UBP. Denktash narrowly retained the presidency, while the UBP managed to stay in power only by forming a fragile coalition government with two small splinter parties, and that was the beginning of the coalition governments in Turkish Cypriot politics. The left's gain, sorry for this historical overview, because but I believe it is important in order to see how the two poles in Turkish Cypriot politics were formed, and I think it is important to understand today who is on which side and for why, for what reason. The left's gain in 1981 were achieved by capitalizing on economic and social issues, areas in which the UBP was particularly vulnerable. The party's principal strengths lay in its leadership, right? Especially the enduring personal influence of Denktash, who remained a widely respected figure despite declining electoral support, and in its near complete quote-unquote ownership of the national question. On this issue, it was the leftist parties, particularly the CTP, and to a lesser extent the TKP, that found themselves exposed. A recurrent accusation leveled against them, these two parties, the CTP and the TKP, I mean, by opponents was that they were insufficiently patriotic, or worse still, pro-Greek, right? Which was considered the most serious charge imaginable in that political context. It is therefore unsurprising that the left sought to avoid focusing on the national question during election campaigns, and equally unsurprising that Denktash and the UBP consistently preferred to fight their battles on precisely that terrain. The declaration of the so-called TRNC, right, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, in 1983 can interpreted in several ways. On the surface, it was presented as a step intended to strengthen the Turkish Cypriot position internationally, particularly after a series of setbacks, by asserting the community's right to self-determination and proclaiming a separate state. In effect, the Turkish Cypriots were claiming an international status equal to that of the Greek Cypriots, a point that was not lost on the south, where the move triggered an immediate and vehement reaction. However, the declaration of the TRNC can also be understood as a strategic move within the arena of Turkish Cypriot domestic politics. Its timing, in particular, must be viewed in the context of the delicate left-right balance that had emerged after the 1981 elections, right? An equilibrium the declaration had the potential to unsettle. Sorry. Now, those on the far left of the ideological spectrum rejected the very idea of independence outright, dismissing it as a right-wing nationalist maneuver intended to prevent the working classes of both communities, Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot, from uniting. Others adopted a less extreme stance but remained deeply suspicious that Denktash, who had been the driving force behind the declaration, intended to use it to revive his and his party's declining electoral fortunes. Uh, what does that mean at the time? If he succeeded in once again pushing the national question to the forefront of the political debate, this would likely undermine the left's efforts to attract voters on everyday socioeconomic bread and butter issues. The opposition was also concerned that during the drafting of a new constitution, Denktash would attempt to, to, to secure additional powers for the presidency. Ultimately, this fear proved unfounded. The combined strength of the opposition parties was sufficient to block any major institutional change, and Denktash and his party were forced to settle for a document that differed only marginally from its predecessor. The most significant institutional amendment was an increase in the number of seats in the legislature from 40 to 50. In the referendum held in May, I think on May 5th of 1985, 70 something percent of the electorate voted in favor of the new constitution. In the subsequent presidential and parliamentary elections held separately in June, Denktaş's reinvigorated reputation as the defender of the Turkish Cypriot rights secured him a resounding victory. In an election marked by an impressive turnout of 85%, he won 70% of the vote, while his nearest rival received only 18%, something. Denktaş thus recovered nearly all the support he had lost in 1981, although his party did not experience a comparable resurgence. In subsequent elections, it became clear that the establishment of the TRNC did indeed influence the Turkish Cypriot political dynamic in precisely the ways the left opposition had feared. It revived the national question and rejuvenated Denktaş's electoral standing. It also halted the gradual erosion of UBP support and slowed the momentum of the left of center parties. Since then, although the UBP has at times been compelled to form coalitions with smaller partners and has occasionally suffered electoral setbacks, it has nonetheless remained the most dominant party in the TRNC, and I think the only one capable of forming single-party governments. Its greatest strength lies in its large and generally stable base of nationalistically inclined center-right voters, a constituency the party cultivates with care. Its ideological appeal is further reinforced by strong leadership, efficient organizational structures, effective advertising and political messaging, a well-developed candidate pool, and notably its strategic use of patronage to reward loyalty and service. By 2005, however, signs of potential realignment in partisan loyalties had begun to emerge. Between 1993 and 2005, the two major parties that we talk about for the past 5 minutes alternated in office through a series of coalition governments during which one issue, the UN-sponsored Annan Plan for reunification, dominated the political agenda. This placed the UBP as the principal anti-Annan party on the wrong side of public opinion. This is wrong side of the public opinion because based on the results of the referendum conducted at the time, more than 70% of the Turkish Cypriot voted in favor of the Annan plan. Now, in the 2003 elections, the CTP won more seats than its counterpart, but not enough to form a stable coalition, leading to yet another round of elections in 2005. These elections, coming on the heels of the 2004 referendum, in which Turkish Cypriots, as mentioned, overwhelmingly supported the CTP's pro-Annan position, were critical for the UBP and Denktash himself, which was then in opposition and faced potentially disastrous losses. In the end, the UBP managed to retain its footing, but it could not compete with the CTP-led coalition, which won a clear majority of 30 seats. Now, the CTP benefited from being in government during a period of exceptional economic growth in the TRNC, but above all, it reaped the political rewards of the referendum outcome. It also ran an effective campaign, downplaying its traditional left-wing program and emphasizing instead its credentials as the pro-EU party, a message that implicitly promised future prosperity and international legitimacy. This appeal was further strengthened also by the global recognition of its leader, Mehmet Ali Talat, who appeared prominently in campaign materials alongside senior EU officials and other world leaders. Imagine that, a Turkish Cypriot leader next to senior EU officials and world leaders. So, the carryover effect from the referendum gave the CTP a rare opportunity to cement what seemed to be a major realignment in the party system. Yet, for several reasons, it failed to do so. The favorable treatment that the EU had promised and which the CTP had prematurely assumed would materialize proved largely illusory. Inflationary increases in public sector wages generated widespread resentment. The economy deteriorated and the governing coalition came under mounting pressure before ultimately collapsing. Now, in the parliamentary elections of April 2009, voters who had drifted away from the returned to their old party in large numbers, giving it an absolute majority with 44% of the vote, while its counterpart, the CTP, fell back to its more typical level of support, 29% of the vote. By 2010, the UBP had been restored to its position of preeminence in the party system and was once again able to form a single-party government under Dervish Eroglu. Now, the victory of Mustafa Kinci in the 2015 Turkish Cypriot leadership marked a significant moment of political reorientation within the Turkish Cypriot community. Akinci, a very charismatic leader, as most commentators and research scholars say, long associated with progressive municipal governance and bicommunal cooperation in Nicosia, campaigned on a platform centered on reconciliation, federal reunification, and the reassertion of Turkish Cypriot political agency vis-à-vis Ankara. His election reflected a broad societal desire for a more autonomous and solution-oriented political trajectory, following years of stagnation and disillusionment with hardline nationalist approaches. The high levels of support he received, particularly from urban, educated, and younger segments of society, indicated a renewed commitment to a Cypriot civic identity and to a meaningful engagement with the peace process. His victory, Akinzi's victory, was therefore widely interpreted as a mandate to revitalize negotiations with the Greek Cypriot leadership and to seek a settlement framework consistent with the principles of a bizonal, bicommunal federation. On the other hand, in the following election in 2020, Ersin Tatar's victory represented a pivot in the opposite direction. It becomes obvious, depending on this constant change in leadership of the Turkish Cypriot government, shifts the entire direction, right? Regarding regarding the Northern Cypriot community, the Turkish Cypriot community in general, and how the Cyprus issue was approached, as we will see. What Tatar's election also signaled, and this is really important in order to see how Erhuman will deal with it now, is the ascendancy of a more nationalist and Ankara-aligned political vision within the occupied north. Tatar's victory occurred amid unprecedented levels of political intervention by Turkey, including public endorsements, coordinated media campaigns, and pressure exerted on opposition candidates, factors that contributed to a shift in the electoral landscape. His platform centered on the idea of sovereign equality and the formalization of a two-state solution, aligned closely with Ankara's post-Kramodana strategic posture in the Eastern Mediterranean. Tatar's rise also reflected demographic and structural changes within the electorate, including the growing influence of settler populations and conservative social forces. The result underscored a deepening division within the Turkish Cypriot community between those advocating renewed federal negotiations and those favoring increased political, economic, and institutional integration with Turkey. As such, Tatar's election marked a turning point, reinforcing the entrenchment of partitionist narratives and altering the parameters of the Cyprus question for the ensuing period. Here, let me mention that Northern Cyprus' last presidential election, right, in 2020, was marked by, as mentioned, Turkey's interference on Tatar's behalf. And I think this is an important point in order to see the different levels that Turkey is becoming an active actor in Turkish Cypriot politics, right? Even Mustafa Akinci had made a number of comments that rubbed Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his government the wrong way. He even alleged that Turkey sponsored, he even accused Turkish government that it threatened Mustafa Akinci right? And he was threatened by members of the Turkish secret services, Turkish intelligence, uh, and even that Erdogan and his government rigged the elections. And thus we come to the present, right? To this, sorry for this historical journey of Turkish Cypriot politics and parties, right? So we come to today, right? And despite the short pre-election period, just 6 weeks, the campaign was intense, right? As Nikos Mouduros has argued, the debate extended well beyond the traditional boundaries of the Cyprus problem. It became a broad political contest over governance itself, over the economy, the rule of law, institutional credibility, and above all, the nature of the Turkish Cypriot community's relationship with Ankara. In this sense, sorry, voters were not simply choosing between two individuals, but between two distinct political orientations. One insisting on deeper alignment with Turkey, and the other seeking greater political autonomy and the reopening of the diplomatic horizon. One of the most striking trends of recent years, and particularly visible in this election, is the shifting emotional landscape among Turkish Cypriots. The mobilizing passion for reunification that characterized the early 2000s, right, seen most clearly during the Annan Plan referendum, has steadily diminished. It has been replaced by a more sober, sometimes pessimistic attitude rooted in everyday concerns, right? The ability to survive economically, to preserve communal identity, and to secure a degree of democratic governance within a system increasingly shaped by Ankara. This shift in priorities is crucial for understanding also the voting behavior that unfolded in this election. Another major factor shaping the electoral environment is demographic. The continuous and systematic granting of so quote unquote citizenship to tens of thousands of Turkish nationals, the so-called Türkiye'liler, people from Turkey, coming from Turkey, has altered the structure of the electorate. If this pace continues, it has been rightly argued, Turkish Cypriot will soon cease to be the majority among registered voters. Right? This demographic engineering not only reshapes electoral outcomes, but also modifies, we could say, the long-term political balance in favor of parties and candidates aligned with Ankara. Indeed, following the 1974 invasion, intercommunal violence came to an end, but it also resulted in displacement on a massive scale. Right? According to Gürel and Ozersay, 142,000 Greek Cypriots were displaced from the northern to the southern part of the island, and according to the official Turkish Cypriot sources, 45,000 Turkish Cypriots moved to the opposite direction. Right? So this de facto population exchange created ethnically homogeneous structures on both sides of the island. What's important here is that Turkey, in order to consolidate this division, right, the division, employed a Turkification process. And I think this process continues, in my view, to this day. A key component of this process was the state-organized migration initiated in 1975, right, from Turkey to northern Cyprus. We could identify, based on the modalities and timing of the arrivals, into three distinct waves. I will go through them really quickly. Right, the first wave arrived between 1975-79. Right, Mehmet Ali Birant, a famous Turkish journalist who passed away, reported that their number had already reached 30,000 by 1976, right? So after a year, uh, and although some later returned to Turkey, around 15,000 were successfully settled, right, quote unquote, by the late 1970s. In the early 1930s, a scholar, a researcher, estimates that the number of Turkiyeli, right, the people, the immigrants, in the early 1990s is somewhere between 25 to 35,000, a number that has been increased considerably the following decades. Now, the second and the third waves during the 1980s and 90s and later mostly migrated on their own initiative and did not typically receive similar incentives as the first state organized uh, uh, mobilization of the people. Now, what's important here is that this policy, this Turkification policy, generated significant backlash and has remained a highly sensitive and controversial issue within both intracommunal and intercommunal politics in Cyprus since 1974. Right? Among many Turkish Cypriots, it fostered a profound fear of assimilation, rooted in concerns that their distinct identity, culture, and political voice would be diminished, if not extinct, by the increasing demographic weight of settlers from mainland Turkey. At the same time, it provoked strong reactions from the Greek Cypriot side, which views these immigrants as settlers and accuses Turkey of pursuing a deliberate policy of colonization in northern Cyprus. Sorry. It is quite evident that the settlement of Turkish immigrants in northern Cyprus marked the beginning of an uneasy and complex relationship. Among the intentions behind this policy was the expectation that contact with immigrants from Anatolia would reinforce the Turkish identity of native Turkish Cypriots. Yet, for many Turkish Cypriots, the effect was quite the opposite. Instead of strengthening a shared sense of Turkishness, it heightened their sense of distinctiveness from mainland Turks. Several scholars note that this influx composed largely of Anatolian peasants, served to dramatize cultural, social, and even linguistic differences, prompting Turkish Cypriots to differentiate themselves more sharply. Rauf Denktash and his UBP party, as mentioned, was a staunchly pro-Turkey party. Cypriots, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots know and remember that his famous quote that Rauf Denktash portrayed himself as a Turk, coincidentally born in Cyprus, stressing his Turkishness and treating his Cypriotness as merely incidental. Right? He argued several times that there is nothing common between the two communities. Now, importantly, discomfort with the presence of settlers was not confined to Turkish Cypriots on the left, right, who were more open to unification with the Greek Cypriots, right? But the reaction and the discomfort came from different segments from across the Turkish Cypriot political spectrum, who expressed, everyone expressed similar concerns. So the unease was not only or not merely ideological, but deeply rooted in everyday experiences and perceptions of imbalance, inequality, and demographic change. Uh, so, as a result, the gradually evolving but never fully consolidated construction of Turkish identity among Turkish Cypriots appears to be undergoing a further transformation into a distinctively Turkish Cypriot or even Cypriot identity. A caveat, however, is necessary. Identity preferences vary significantly across the political spectrum. Those on the left tend to identify primarily as Cypriots, emphasizing a civic, territorial understanding of identity that transcends ethnic origin. Those on the right, by contrast, foreground their Turkishness, identifying themselves as Turkish Cypriots, a formulation that places greater weight on ethnic ties and cultural affiliation with Turkey. Now, what unites both groups, nonetheless, is a shared reference point, right? Cyprus. So, regardless of ideological leanings, identity is now articulated in relation to the island itself. Now, against this background, the election results were particularly revealing, and I'm talking about these 2025 election results. Uh, Tufan Erhuman secured a decisive victory, winning approximately 63% of the vote, compared with Tatar's 36%. The margin was wider than most analysts expected and indicated a strong desire for change. It signaled that a significant segment of society wishes to resist the further consolidation of Ankara's control and to reopen space for negotiation, moderation, and institutional reform. However, this does not mean that a dramatic change in the relationship with Turkey is imminent. Right, Turkey's involvement in northern Cyprus spans a wide range of political, economic, and social domains, shaping the region's governance to an extent unmasked by any other external actor. Since 1974 and with greater intensity after the 2000s, Ankara has exercised substantial influence over the TRNC's budget, public administration, infrastructure, and security structures, effectively bending northern Cyprus with Turkey's broader strategic framework. Right? What Umut Bozkurt in a great article with the title "From Motherland to the IMF of Northern Cyprus" very elegantly demonstrates. Beyond economic aid protocols, Turkey directly shapes sectors such as energy, water supply, education, and religious affairs, while also exerting strong influence over electoral processes, party politics, and leadership decisions. The post 2016 period marked a qualitative shift as Ankara adopted an increasingly interventionist approach, promoting conservative social policies, regulating media and public discourse, and reinforcing demographic changes through the granting, as mentioned, of citizenship of to Turkish nationals. This expanding sphere of influence has generated significant attention within the Turkish Cypriot community. While some view Turkey as a guarantor of security and economic stability, others regard the depth of its involvement as a threat to democratic autonomy and to the preservation of a distinct Turkish Cypriot civic identity. This background, I believe, exemplifies, at least to a degree, Erhuman's repeatedly statements, and this is something that we should pay attention. I mean, Erhuman's statements and speeches in order to see to what extent the new Turkish Cypriot leader can distance himself from Ankara and shape his own distinct agenda, right? So Erdogan repeatedly stated that foreign policy will continue to involve consultation with Ankara, right? The political and economic structures of the occupied north are deeply integrated with Turkey, and these constraints limit the extent of autonomous action. Right? Turkey's President Erdogan made clear in his address to the General Assembly, to the Grand National Assembly, a few months ago that he backs a two-state deal on Cyprus. Right? Congratulating Erdogan for his victory. Uh, Still, Erdogan stated, that he would continue defending the sovereign rights and interests of the breakaway Turkish Cypriots. Now it's unclear if Erdogan has the clout to deviate from this line, given the North's economic and political dependence on Turkey. Now, also, Erdogan himself has rejected claims that he would seek to abolish Turkey's military intervention rights in place under any peace agreement. Greek Cypriots see any such rights enshrined in a deal as a threat to their own security. Right? Greek Cypriot officials said that the deal breaking in the 2017 talks, right, in the Crown Modana, was Turkey's insistence, keeping its right to intervene as well as its troops indefinitely on the island. While the Turkish Cypriots say Turkey's military presence is necessary for their protections, Greek Cypriots interpret this as Ankara's means to assert its control over the entire island. Nevertheless, the election result does represent a clear political message. And the message is that Turkish Cypriots want a degree of recalibration in that relationship and a recentering of their own communal agency. Whether Turkey will allow such a recalibration remains uncertain, although Ankara's agenda for the past 10-15 years allow us a degree of skepticism. Ankara's response will depend on several broader factors, right? Regional geopolitics in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? Evolving relations between Cyprus and Israel, how the Kurdish question will evolve, and even Turkey's engagement with European defense structures. So these external dynamics, I believe, will shape how Turkey will react to a Turkish Cypriot leadership that is less aligned with the two-state agenda it has promoted for the past recent years. Right? Indeed, it is impossible to understand the Turkish Cypriot election without understanding the situation in Turkey, where many citizens are also wondering whether they will ever have free and fair elections again. Right? With the incarceration of Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu in Turkey and the expanding crackdown of the Republican People's Party, the so-called CHP in Turkish, Turkey has become an example of what political scientists call hegemonic electoral authoritarianism, or what causal observers call Putinesque autocracy. Now, Erdogan's domestic and foreign policy trajectory has ensured that he no longer has any incentive to seek a political solution on Cyprus. And instead, he has, I would say, ample motive to block one, right? For starters, strengthening Turkey's relationship with the EU is no longer the carrot that it used to be. And in any case, the EU does not seem too perturbed by Turkey's autocratic transformation, so long as Ankara keeps immigration in check. But beyond this, Northern Cyprus has taken on an increasingly prominent role in Turkey's defense thinking. As a result of growing security cooperation between the Republic of Cyprus, Greece, Israel, and the United States over the past decade, Turkey has come to feel increasingly contained in the Eastern Mediterranean. So from this perspective, Northern Cyprus appears to be a key foothold for Turkey to reinforce its southern flank. More recently, Erdogan's circle has come to believe Northern Cyprus has an even more crucial role to play in Turkey's long-term struggle against Israel. The unprecedented aggression of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has led Turkish voters and policymakers to fear that they might fall into Israel's crosshairs. While some of this reflects long-standing paranoia, recent developments from the Republic of Cyprus' recent acquisition of Israeli air defense systems to direct threats in Israeli op-ed pages have given these fears newfound substance. With Israel and Ankara now facing off in Syria as well, Northern Cyprus has been transformed into a critical pawn in a bigger geopolitical game. Thus, we could argue that the 2025 elections demonstrated three central realities, and I'm coming to a close. I know I tired you. First, the Turkish Cypriot electorate expressed a clear desire for political change and a rejection of the more hardline separatist agenda. Second, the elections underscored the deep structural constraints under which Turkish Cypriot politics operate, constraints shaped by demographics, economic dependence that we mentioned, and Ankara's increasingly assertive presence. And finally, the result suggests a reopening, however cautious, of the possibility of renewed diplomatic engagement on the Cyprus issue. Whether this moment leads to real political transformation or becomes another missed opportunity will depend not only on the new leadership of in the north, but also on developments in Ankara, Nicosia, and the wider region, especially if we take consideration that the Cyprus question has become a deeply geopolitical issue that intersects with regional energy disputes, Turkey's relations with the EU, the rapprochement between Cyprus and Israel, and wider dynamics in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, the more the Cyprus problem becomes entangled in regional power politics, the harder it is for local leaders to shape their own destinies, I believe. And to conclude, and apologies for taking that long, the political history of the Turkish Cypriot community reveals a long-standing tension between two identities. One rooted in Cypriotness, coexistence, and the aspiration for a federal solution, the other grounded in nationalism, securitization, and deep alignment with Turkey. Voting patterns reflect this oscillation, while Turkey's involvement, especially as mentioned in the last 2 decades, has increasingly shaped the political landscape. So these dynamics complicate the Cyprus question, but they also make its resolution even more urgent. The future will depend not only on Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot relations, but also on the evolving internal politics of the Turkish Cypriot community and the strategic calculations of Turkey itself. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, very insightful. Um, I think we have some time for a couple of questions. So I would like to ask our visitors, our guests, whether they have any questions. You can raise your hand or you can send your question to the chat room. Feel free to ask anything you want.
I think maybe we should start with the questions we have, and then if they have any, they could jump in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because I have a. So I'll start with my question. So, thank you very much. It was indeed very insightful, and I think we
we take for granted, Turkey usually overshadows its politics and aspirations, with the occupation overshadows what's happening with the people on the ground. We forget there is, different trends. We forget that they have needs that might not be so different from the needs and the aspiration of the other side. So it's really interesting to see how this has this trajectory in itself. My question is regarding the people to people dynamic. I mean, there have always been some, from my very limited knowledge, some efforts for people to people initiatives, communities in which they cooperate, to have, like, the buffer zone, have the home for cooperation. They have these things. And as you said, the elections are a reflection of that intention. And even though it's hard given the big shadow that Turkey casts uh, with its occupation, we do see some such initiatives. Um, do you think the initiatives play a role, and do you see this having, from generation to generation, any new dynamics?
Mhm. Okay, thank you for the question, Zakia. And it's a very interesting question, right? And people to people, right? Initiatives from different NGOs coming together, talking to each other, doing things. Uh, and that was uh, really evident during the early 2000s. On the eve of the Annan Plan. Uh, Back then, 20 plus years was really, really visible, and it made, I believe, a difference. I remember I was a student then, back then at the University of Cyprus, and we were constantly hearing about these things, watching these things taking shape. And I think, to large extent, when it comes to Turkish Cypriot community, it was because of these initiatives and the people-to-people interaction, right? That the referendum was voted for by the Turkish Cypriot community, right? I think it made them feel, uh, I don't know if how it will sound, but wanted, right? That there is future in reuniting the island at last after so many decades. Uh, while with the time goes by, these people to people, although they're very much still there, I have the impression, although I don't know, right? I haven't visited Cyprus for several years, so I would like to go to home cooperation and talk with people there and see uh, the extent that these interactions continue. Although I know that still go on, right? But I have the impression that they decreased over the years. Uh, but I think, and this is the optimistic scenario, that the seeds are there from 20 plus years ago. The, these interactions are here, and they will stay for generations to come, right? So I don't know if I replied to your question, but I think the generations of 20 plus years ago transferred this, I don't know, this future that they had in their minds to their own children, to younger generations, and so on. So I think there is hope. When it comes to people to people, the Cyprus question would be solved, right? I know it sounds a bit cliche, right? But I really do believe that.
Oh, okay. We have another question, but I wanted to add something to that. Despite me, having such an intense, sense of acknowledgement and validation of all the communities. I was I was some months ago at the home of cooperation, and I had just landed in Lanakan. We just drove to the home of cooperation, and I had enough coffee, but I needed just a little bit more coffee. So I just came from Greece, and I reached to the cafe of home cooperation. I said, "Can I have a Greek coffee?" And there was he must have been barely 18 or 19, from the Turkish Cypriot community, or I think it's better to say the Muslim Cypriot community. And I'm like, oh, sorry. I mean, it's a Greek Cypriot, or I didn't realize what I was saying. Would you prefer to call it Turkish Cypriot, or how would you? I was just trying to, more calm down the situation. And he looked at me very seriously, and rightfully so. And he put me in my place, and he said, um, just Cypriot coffee.
Exactly.
It was 18, 19, and I was very happy to stand corrected by an 18-year-old. So this was a couple of months ago. So yeah, I think you answered, and I think you're right. The seeds were there, and you see it. Thank you again. We have one question.
Okay, thank you very much for your really, really interesting talk. And in your talk, you made perfectly clear that the Turkish shadow over the Turkish Cypriot community is too intense and too widespread to just ignore it. So my question would be, and of course, you also said that Turkey has been more or less pushing towards as you said, two-state solution. So the recognition of the occupied territories as a separate state. So my question would be, what it would take in terms of Turkish policy and Turkish, strategic outlook to change, quote unquote, its stance on the issue and allow for more, for the resumption of negotiations and, the intracommunal talks and hopefully a resolution of the conflict.
Okay, that's the million-dollar question, right? Yeah. Really, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what policymakers in Ankara and Erdogan himself has in his mind, and what would be enough as an exchange in order to change his mind. And I think however, I think it's a combination of things, right? Let's not forget how Erdogan was in the early 2000s, at least regarding to Cyprus, right? He openly criticized Denktash, right? And he pushed him to open the barricades, the Green Line, right? It was a totally different Erdogan back then. What changed in the meantime was a combination of reasons. The EU's stance, right? More hard politics domestically, the Arab uprisings, right? The Gezi uprising in Istanbul. So Cyprus was one of the things that his policy was evidently changed. Now, in the current situation that Turkey is in, I don't know. Really, I don't know. And the fronts are too many, right? It could be to include Turkey to the energy or the gas reserves found, or any agreement that Cyprus, Greece, Israel, Egypt has when it comes to gas reserves. I mean, we all remember a few years ago Turkey's response to this kind of deal between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel or Egypt. I cannot remember. Right? We excluded Turkey. So one could be economic, right? The second one, it's a wild guess, right? To really, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't think Erdogan. There is something that Erdogan would bargain in order to change his mind, right? Cyprus for Erdogan now is a bargaining chip. I don't think he has any significant interest in Cyprus, right? Let's think about it. Offers nothing to Turkey apart from this new status, geopolitical status that has been that is taking shape now, right? But apart from that, he only spends, right? A great portion of the really bad economy of Turkish economy goes to the northern Cyprus, right? So I think what the EU, the USA, the United States, or Greece and the Greek Cypriots and the Republic of Cyprus, I mean, could offer him, that thing should be really substantial. But honestly, to be honest, I don't know what that could be. Right? Really, I find it really difficult to answer, even to make an estimate. So, sorry about that, Marina. Really, it was really nice, really interesting question. And to tell you the truth, I never thought about it, right? Because I think Erdogan's agenda, Turkey's agenda is so fixed that I don't know. Perhaps I don't have the mind to, as a policymaker, to think so strategically. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, it's an honest answer, because I've been asking myself the same question and I don't have, an answer. And I'm afraid that there is nothing that it can be, as an offer, a counter offer, unfortunately, with and the implication that has on the peace process or anything. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. But your question is noted. I will think about it and I will contact you once I might
Please do.
come up with something. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think if there are no more questions, we can close our session for tonight. I would like to thank you very much, Professor. It was a pleasure having you. It was very insightful, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really, it was a pleasure having you. I think it was a very well needed, insightful, take on the situation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Ευχαριστώ σας πολλά.
Καλό βράδυ.
Have a nice night. Good night.
Bye, everyone.